We ran the guy's license plate, Dwayne Martin. We know he works with her. We don't know how long it's been going on, but I think it's clear and convincing evidence. Oh, and we have a camera on the front of the house that covers the driveway and garage so we can tell when they come and go. I'll email you a link to the live feed on our secure server. I've talked to Harry and I'm going to write up a report and supporting affidavit for him to file. Sorry again, friend. Frank shook hands with Harry and Nick and walked out of the office. So, what do you want to do? Asked Harry. File for divorce on the grounds of adultery. But don't file for her. Harry looked at Nick expressionlessly. Trust me, Harry. When I hear those words, I get an upset stomach. I don't want you to do anything stupid here. I expect it to go more smoothly than you realize. Harry grimaced. Look, Harry, just file it Monday afternoon. Just before the clerk's office closes. Let me know the case number. I'll take care of the rest. Just remember, Nick. I don't practice criminal law. Not very well anyway. If you need to get out of some kind of trouble, I can't help you. You'll be pleasantly surprised, Nick said as he walked out the door. Nick's next stop was a meeting with Sam Granger. It was a very productive meeting where Nick learned that they could sell the house for over $100,000 more than the mortgage, and with no commission to the real estate agent. Linda would be thrilled. Nick promised to have all the necessary paperwork ready to close the deal as soon as possible. Leaving Sam's office, Nick looked at his phone. No messages, no calls. She must still be having fun with Dwayne. Nick took the opportunity to call his boss, Sven, and tell him that he urgently needed 2 weeks of vacation, or he was quitting. Sven immediately panicked because Nick was the only one who knew what was going on with the case and agreed. Fortunately, there was a lull in Sven's business so he could give Nick some slack. Having laid the groundwork, Nick returned to the hotel to get down to the real work. By Monday evening, he was ready. On Sunday night and Monday, Linda left voice messages that he didn't respond to. He was saving all his energy for Tuesday morning. Thanks to Frank's camera set up in front of the house, Nick knew that Dwayne had spent Monday night there. And judging by the fact that Dwayne had been there from Sunday night to Monday morning, he would likely leave for work around 8 a.m. Linda will leave around 8:30 a.m. So at 7 a.m., Nick walked in the front door and yelled, "Honey, I'm home." He heard sharp footsteps upstairs, and then Linda came down the stairs in her robe, disheveled and shocked. "Honey, what a surprise," she said, trying to sound cheerful, but barely on her feet and clearly on the verge of panic. "I thought you'd be gone until Friday. You didn't return my calls." "Sorry," Nick replied cheerfully. "You know how it is on the road." Nick pretended not to notice the wine glasses in the living room and headed straight for the dining room. Linda stood in the doorway, staring at Nick, trying to figure out what she should do next to keep him from going up the stairs to where Dwayne was obviously hiding. A knock on the door caught her off guard. "Can you get it, honey?" asked Nick. In the meantime, he began to spread out the papers on the dining room table and pretended not to notice Linda squaring her shoulders and going to open the door, perhaps expecting to see the bailiff with the divorce papers. But instead, Maggie came in just as Linda opened the door and said simply, "Hi." Linda watched curiously as Maggie sat down at the dining room table and opened the briefcase. "I'm sorry, honey," Nick said, "but I don't know when I'm going to come up for air again, and you know I can't think about you going on an overseas trip without a renewed power of attorney. You know, just in case something goes wrong and we have to deal with some financial or medical issues. Oh, and I also had a couple moments over the weekend and got an offer to refinance my mortgage at a very favorable rate. Since we'll both be traveling, I figured this was the only time we'd be able to do it. I apologize for the short notice." He tried to look apologetic. "Who's that?" asked Linda, pointing at Maggie when the artery in her temple stopped pulsing so hard. "I'm Maggie. Maggie is a notary," Nick explained. Linda visibly relaxed. She still had a lover hidden upstairs, but events weren't quite out of control yet. "This is my Boy Scout. Always ready," she said with a smirk as she sat down, though her eyes were still wary. "It's just the way I am, darling." He handed Linda a pen and began shifting papers in front of her. "The check marks with arrows indicate where you need to sign. Take your time reading them if you want to. I trust you," Linda said with a wide smile, quickly signing all the papers in front of her. He hoped that was the case because otherwise he wasn't going to get anywhere. But he who dares wins, as they say. While Linda signed each document, Nick arranged them and handed them to Maggie, who lined them up and notarized them. Mrs. Buford, do you have a photo ID? Asked Maggie. Linda got up from the table to find her purse. Maggie and Nick exchanged glances, but both had to quickly lower their eyes to the table to keep from laughing. Linda brought her driver's license to the table. Maggie took a picture of it with her phone and wrote the information in her notary journal. Linda offered coffee, but both Nick and Maggie declined while Maggie wrote down the documents she had notarized in her journal, and Nick moved everything into different folders. Linda looked up, expecting Nick to try to go there and calculating her next move. Maggie left, putting away all the tools, and smiled at Nick when Linda wasn't looking. Nick gave Linda a break, saying that he needed to have a teleconference and would go down to his basement office to do so. Linda's shoulders relaxed. For now she would have time to escort Dwayne out the door and remove any trace of his presence before Nick reappeared from his man cave. Nick went downstairs to give her the illusion that she was still fooling him. He pretended he didn't hear Dwayne's heavy footsteps coming down the stairs, or the sound of the garage door opening so Dwayne's car could pull out. But when he heard the sound of the shower running in the master bath, Nick gathered up everything he had, walked out the basement door, and drove away in his car without a word to his loving wife. 2 hours later, after a hearty breakfast at the diner, Nick was in Harry's office. Harry looked shocked. So, are you saying you got the wife to sign a Form C-1406 agreeing to the service of the divorce petition on her and waiving service of court notices and notices of any future proceedings? Yes. The properly notarized form is right here. And it was. Are you also telling me that you got your wife, an experienced attorney, to sign a property division agreement whereby she gives you all the proceeds from the sale of your house and the property in it, the cars and jewelry she owns, leaves you full discretion over the disposition of her personal belongings, and allows you both to walk away with the retirement accounts each of you has? Without any alimony on your part in her favor? She makes more money than me anyway. According to those documents, she expressed her willingness to get out of the marriage with only about $125,000 in retirement contributions and about $200,000 in undergraduate and law school debt. Is that correct? She's always had a very generous nature. Harry narrowed his eyes as he looked at Nick and went back to the papers on his desk. And you also made her sign an affidavit in which she admits to cheating and even admits that her lover was upstairs in the marital bedroom at the time she signed the affidavit and was there all night after having sex with her the night before? Are you even telling me that her affidavit supports the authenticity and accuracy of this email correspondence in which she talks about staying with her lover because he makes her wet? That's what you're telling me? Counselor, Nick said, showing no emotion as far as he could. The documents speak for themselves. Harry looked at the papers, looked up at Nick, started to smile, suppressed the smile and twisted in his chair. To hell with it. I'm filing all of this. You are a respected member of the bar and a friend from law school. How was I supposed to know you were making all this up? Everything looked fine to me, Your Honor. I am deeply embarrassed. I was completely consumed by the fact that my client violated my trust. If anyone should be disbarred, it's Nicholas A. Buford J.D. Esquire, Your Honor. See where I'm going with this, Nick? Uh-huh. If need be, will this notary witness that Linda signed all of this? Yes, it will. Will she testify that Linda scrutinized the documents? I wouldn't want to try to prejudge or influence anyone's testimony, but as you said, Linda is an experienced lawyer who specializes in litigation, so I'm sure she gave the documents the attention she felt they deserved. I'm sure the notary will say she saw Linda Buford review the documents and sign each one. Otherwise, I cannot give an opinion as to her state of mind with respect to understanding the contents of each document. Okay then, Harry said. I'll file all that today plus Frank's affidavit and report. There are photos and a DVD attached. I'll see if I can't get it out of the electronic file for a while. We don't want it to make the news, do we? No, Nick said. Linda's leaving for Paris in a little over 2 weeks. The longer things go quietly, the better. Do you know anyone at the county courthouse? Do you remember Seth? Asked Harry. Day student next year after us? He had trouble getting a job at the law firm. So now he's clerking at the county courthouse trying to build up his resume. He might be able to speed up the process. But if the judge wants live testimony, the whole thing could collapse under its own weight. Linda will have to decide she doesn't want to fight the case on fraud on the court when she realizes what's going on. If things go south at that point, I may have to dispense with the services of your attorney. Fair enough. Someday you'll tell me the whole story, but right now I don't want to hear it. For the next 2 weeks, Nick managed to keep Linda at arm's length. He sent her text messages at off hours, letting her know how busy he was, but he answered her calls the rest of the time. Over time, she began to call less frequently. You scared the hell out of her, Frank told him at the end of the week. Judging from the videotape, Dwayne hasn't been in the house once since you showed up and surprised them Tuesday morning. I can't tell if they're meeting at his place during the week or having fun with each other at the office, but they're not doing it in the house. I'll tell you if anything changes. The only thing that had changed was that Nick had quietly returned to the house when he found out Linda was gone, and had taken the financial papers he thought he might need. He also signed a contract to sell the house to Sam Granger. The transaction was to take place during Linda's first week in France. The rest of the time, Nick went to the gym, did some leisure reading, and pondered how he had gotten to the point where he was 30 years old with his life in such disarray. He told Sven that he needed a few more weeks off, and Sven reluctantly agreed. She's having fun with him at the house again, Frank said Saturday, a week before Linda was scheduled to leave for Paris. Thanks for the heads up, Nick replied. He didn't care, but he knew that once he got rid of the house, he'd rather burn the sheets than sell them. By this time, Nick had watched the video that Frank had given him the first time. He realized his attraction. Dwayne was a couple years younger, and as Frank's investigation had revealed, the guy was a gym rat, constantly pulling himself up in front of the mirror after weight training. Otherwise, he was unremarkable. In comparison, Nick was in decent shape, but certainly didn't have a taut belly. Linda was obviously looking for arm candy. Nick could well do without such superficiality. Before Nick knew it, Linda was on her long-awaited trip to Paris. One of Frank's men followed her to the airport and waited for the plane to take off, bound for Europe. Upon receiving the news, Nick went to the house, put all of Linda's clothes in a pile in the living room, and packed up everything he wanted to keep. The next day, the movers arrived, packed Linda's things, and sent them to the warehouse. Separately, they packed Nick's things and moved them to the apartment he had found. Thanks to Sam Granger, a skillful reseller, Nick was able to sell the furniture easily. When the house was finally empty, Nick went around the house one last time before doing one last thing. He carefully gathered up the wedding photos and album, as well as Linda's wedding dress. He took them to the fire pit on the patio that was under the treehouse, carefully placed the photos and album in the fire pit on top of the embers, added the dress, some lighter fluid, and lit a match. After everything burned down, Nick was pleased to see that there was indeed a lot of detail in the video. You could even make out the details in each photo as it was added to the pit. A day later, Nick closed on the sale of the marital home, using his wife's power of attorney to sign as her de facto attorney. She really should have read everything she signed. With a separate financial power of attorney, Nick was able to deposit the check for the profit from the sale of the house into his personal account, certifying it on his wife's behalf as her attorney in fact, and close the joint accounts. 3 days after that, still in the first week of Linda's trip to La Belle, France, a construction crew leveled the house. A few days later, they removed the rubble. After that, work began to prepare the site. Unfortunately, the tree with the treehouse, which was perfect for the children, had to be removed. According to the new plan, there was to be a gazebo there. Unfortunately, the moment that only a large square of land remained in place of Nick and Linda's happy home, construction stopped. It seems something went wrong in the permitting process. Nick and his law school friend who worked in the county permit office were confident that the problem would resolve itself within a couple of days of Linda's return from France, as soon as the proper forms were received and approved. In all that time, Nick hadn't returned a single call from Linda. He stopped sending her text messages, did not respond to emails or voicemails. Some of her friends and family called. Nick sent curt messages back saying he was busy and traveling, mostly so they wouldn't try to drive by the house to see him. El Diablo called him on his landline and told him that Linda and Dwayne seemed to be stressed and didn't look their best. She probably suspects that something is wrong. Nick asked how he knew that. El Diablo simply said that he has friends and family everywhere, even in Europe. He asked Nick if he wanted Linda's wedding and engagement rings back. When Nick answered in the negative, El Diablo asked if he would mind if someone else acquired them. Hell no. Okay. I might know someone who would like them. On Wednesday, 2 days before Linda was due back from Paris, Nick was in Harry's office. I don't know how it happened, but here's the divorce decree. It's a lot quicker than usual for this kind of thing. And Seth didn't tell me anything. I don't want to know and I'm not asking. Consider yourself lucky and congratulations on being single again. Here's a copy I'll send to your ex-wife. I'm sure she'll be thrilled. As Nick was getting into his car outside Harry's office, his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but when he answered it, he recognized El Diablo's voice. Nick, you need to take a vacation. Right now. Go someplace where there are a lot of people. People who know you and can tell you've been there. El Diablo hung up the phone. Nick realized he hadn't seen his college friends who lived in New York in a while. Luckily, they had free schedules in the next few days, so he went on Amtrak that afternoon, went to a few shows, visited a few museums, and joined his friends for lunch, coffee, and dinner, most of which he paid for with a credit card. He also tipped generously at the hotel so that all the staff knew who he was. While there, he expressed mail to Linda's parents' home a copy of a DVD of him burning her wedding dress and wedding album. Late one Sunday night, after Nick was enjoying coffee and cake at Little Italy in Manhattan, his phone rang. It was his father-in-law. Nick? Where are you? Linda's going crazy. She's in the hospital. Yet, what's wrong with her? It was getting more and more interesting. She returned from a business trip on Friday, but she and a colleague were apparently kidnapped at the airport. They were drugged and were only able to get out this morning. The coworker was beaten nearly to death. And Linda? Here her father's voice trembled. Once upon a time, Nick might have sympathized. What happened to Linda? When she woke up, she discovered she was covered head to toe in tattoos. Tattoos with horrible inscriptions. Like that she was a whore and a slut. And as soon as she woke up and saw that, some guy in a mask came in and punched her in the nose, breaking it, and then gave her 2 black eyes. Impressive, Nick thought. Really, it was the cherry on top of the ice cream. He would have been happy if Linda had realized that he had betrayed her in court, just as she had betrayed him in marriage. But this was just a rainbow orgasm of joy. It would be worth an immortal soul if he could give it away. I'm sorry to hear that. I'm out of town right now. What would you like me to do? Nick realized that the other end of the wire was surprised. You're her husband. She's your wife. Unfortunately, no. We are divorced. The order was issued last week. She's cheating on me with the guy she's traveling with. What? What exactly was unclear? Nick realized he was showing unnecessary cruelty right now, but he didn't care. I have the video. I can send you a copy if you'd like. There was silence on the other end of the line. Nick wondered if his father-in-law was having a heart attack. We're done with her, so you'll have to take her home. She's not my problem now. You did it, shouted his father-in-law. I've been in New York since Wednesday, celebrating my divorce. Look, I know you're upset, and I hope Linda gets better soon, but I don't think we have anything to say to each other. He hung up the phone. It occurred to Nick at that moment that the stress of city life had been too much lately. He sent Sven an email saying that Sven and the firm could go to hell, respectfully, after all. A quick internet search revealed that there was an REI store in Soho, and Nick got himself some new hiking and camping gear. Linda had never liked camping, so this was a chance to reconnect with her scouting past. The hotel was very accommodating and agreed to leave his luggage for a while for a reasonable fee, and Nick was on his way to the Adirondack Mountains to commune with nature until things calmed down. Luckily, he had his passport with him in case he had time to travel to Canada, and it turned out he did have time. For most of the next 8 weeks, he turned his phone off. At first, he thought some crazy woman had stolen his ex-wife's phone because there were dozens, if not hundreds of messages that seemed to include frantic screaming and crying. He only listened to 1 or 2 and deleted the rest. Lots of crazy emails too. Her account must have been hacked. How could he have taken the time to read all this? He hoped that whoever this crazy woman was, she would get the help she so desperately needed. 8 weeks later, Nick met Frank for a drink. Harry was there too. Just so we're clear, Harry said as they sat down at the table, I terminated our relationship with our attorney immediately after I served you with the divorce decree. I notified you by registered mail. Perhaps you haven't checked your mail yet. Not yet, Nick admitted. A serious shitstorm, my friend, Harry said. Frank, what would you say? More like a typhoon of shit. I like that. There's shit everywhere anyway. Lots of destruction. Harry drank his bourbon and immediately asked for another. Get started, Frank. So Monday morning, the former Mrs. Buford is on her way to the old homestead with her parents. We didn't have time to take the outside camera down. When she sees the vacant lot, she has a complete meltdown. She falls to her knees, sobs, goes into fetal position. She ends up kicking and screaming like a kid at the mall late at night. Then the equipment crew arrives and she loses her temper again. The third time she loses her temper is when the construction workers see what she has tattooed on her face and start laughing. I have to say that the work is so good that the text is very visible on camera. Poor Putta. I love cock and the like. Face, neck, arms. And that's despite the fact that she has raccoon eyes from being punched, plus duct tape for a broken nose. Harry picked up the story. That afternoon, she and a couple other lawyers from big firms showed up at my humble office. They didn't have an appointment, so I made them wait 15 minutes. Made sure my Glock was loaded and in my desk. Thank God we're in Virginia, you know. 15 minutes later, they were all already yelling at me, talking about emergency motions, bar complaints, and contempt proceedings. I have to admit that I had a hard time not looking at the ink all over my face. They were done very clearly in red and blue ink so that they could be seen from a distance. When I was able to shift my attention, I asked what exactly was the problem, which statement in any of the statements was false. They all stopped and looked at each other. Then I asked if there was an argument about your ex committing adultery. They all answered yes. Then I turned on the videotape I had turned on while they were waiting, and good old Linda is clearly writing up and down on the genitals of someone who is not her husband in the marital bed. Obviously they haven't familiarized themselves with all the case files yet. Everyone just looked at each other in confusion. Then Linda started yelling that you didn't even give her a chance to explain. And I said you didn't care what the reason was as long as you did it. She came to her senses and started telling me that she never agreed to let you sell the house and that you burned her wedding dress, pictures, and album. All of those things were her personal property. I showed her copies of powers of attorney, one of which was specifically for the sale of the house. I showed her the property settlement agreement which gave you discretion to dispose of her personal belongings, and told her she was lucky she still had her clothes. I asked if she denied that her signature was on the documents. She replied that she did not, but that she had never agreed to anything that was written in them. I then asked if her entire defense was that she never read what she signed. I asked her to imagine how she would be cross-examined if she challenged anything in court. At that point she was silent. I also pointed to an affidavit she had signed where she admitted that her lover was upstairs at the very moment she was signing and asked if that was true. At this point she lost consciousness. He tried to bring her to her senses, but I just called 911. She refused to go to the hospital with them, but then she started yelling about tattoos and about her boyfriend getting beat up. And I said, you had nothing to do with it as far as I know, and you're out of town anyway. And Dwayne probably pissed off some other wife's husband by sleeping with her, or some other woman who thought Linda was beating Dwayne off her. I told them they knew where the Fairfax Police Department was if they had a criminal case they wanted to discuss. I'm sorry I missed all that. It's getting better, Harry said. So they were still going on, talking about filing a motion for reconsideration and all that. And then I told them that just that morning, I'd gotten an anonymous email with links to some videotapes of Linda and Dwayne in your bed when they started doing it again in front of Paris. The message said that the videotapes would be sent out to everyone Linda knew, and that you, Nick, knew nothing about it and couldn't stop them, and that these are friends you've helped, and that they'll protect you, and that they'll hit the send button the same day if she doesn't leave it alone. Do you know anything about that? I was out of town, Harry. After that they left. I haven't heard from them since. And nothing happened at the courthouse. It was Frank's turn again. They must have gone to the police because they were approached by a couple detectives. They wanted copies of the videotape and the report. Then they lost interest. Neither Linda nor Dwayne could say what happened, only that they got into a cab at the airport. And the next thing the guy knew, he ended up in the hospital. Linda woke up in a rundown hotel, got punched in the face, and ended up in the hospital. The room was billed to her credit card too, plus room service and a minibar.